On a chilly Tuesday morning, the kind that painted the sidewalks with a thin coat of frost and sent reluctant plumes of breath into the air, Marcus Bailey pushed open the glass door of a roadside diner tucked between a gas station and a pawn shop. The tiny brass bell above the door jingled, sharp and hollow, as if even it was reluctant to acknowledge his presence. He stepped in slowly, his boots frayed and damp, the soles barely clinging to the rest of the worn leather. His coat army green and long past its prime hung off his shoulders like a memory. Beneath his cap, his eyes scanned the room, not in suspicion but habit, the way a man learns to read a room after too many nights without a bed or kindness. The diner's warmth hit him all at once, filling his lungs with the scent of burnt coffee, bacon grease, and disinfectant. He nodded respectfully to the room. "Morning," he said, voice low, polite. There was a pause, not a long one, but enough to notice. Conversations didn't stop, but they dipped. Forks paused in midair. A waitress glanced at him, then at the owner behind the counter. Emily Tran stood polishing a mug, her petite frame framed by the silver coffee machines behind her. She was in her 30s, quick-witted and sharper than she let on. Her eyes met Marcus's for a brief moment, no judgment, no surprise, just a curious calculation, then a nod. "You can sit anywhere," she said, breaking the tension with a casual grace. "Want some coffee to warm up?" Marcus nodded gratefully. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you kindly." He slid into a booth near the window. The seat creaked under his weight. Emily came over with a chipped mug and filled it without asking. She placed it down gently, not with pity, but with something closer to respect. Marcus wrapped his hands around the cup like it was the first heat he'd touched in days. Across the room, an elderly man leaned toward his wife and whispered something. She frowned. A teenager stared. Another customer gave Marcus a long, narrow look before returning to his phone. He didn't flinch. He'd seen worse, felt worse. The door jingled again, this time heavier, more deliberate. Two police officers walked in, boots thudding on linoleum, uniforms crisp, badges glinting under fluorescent light. Officer Ron Keller led the way, tall, broad, and red-faced, his jaw tight and eyes already scanning. Behind him, Jake Carson followed, a younger man, new to the force by the look of his uncertain posture. Ron clocked Marcus in an instant. The momentary smirk on his face vanished, replaced by the professional coldness of a man who had already made up his mind. Jake looked too, curious more than anything. Ron strolled toward the counter, but his eyes stayed on Marcus. "Morning, Emily," he said, turned casual. "Ron." "Jake." She didn't smile. Ron nodded toward Marcus. "You know him." Emily wiped her hands on her apron. "He came in for coffee." "Paid with a thank you." Ron chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Right. That's so." Jake watched, silent. Marcus didn't look up, just sit slowly. Ron turned, stepping closer to Marcus's booth. "Got some ID on you, buddy?" Marcus met his gaze. "Not on me, officer. Just came in for some coffee." "That's all right." "Depends," Ron said. "You got a reason to be in this neighborhood." "This is a diner," Marcus said calmly. "I was cold. Figured I'd warm up before heading on." Ron's hand rested on his belt, fingers near his radio. "See, we've had complaints about loiterers. Makes folks nervous." "No complaints came from me," Emily said sharply from the counter. Ron barely acknowledged her. "Mind stepping outside for a minute?" "I haven't done anything wrong," Marcus said. "Just drinking my coffee." "Didn't realize that was an issue." "It becomes one," Ron said, "when folks like you start hanging around places they don't belong." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Ron, maybe we just let the man finish." "Jake," Ron cut in. "I don't need commentary." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I served this country. Bled for it. Don't think warming up in a diner disrespects that." Ron sneered. "Spare me the war story." "Every third vagrant says the same." That's when Emily stepped forward from behind the counter. "Ron," she said, voice firm. "He's not bothering anyone. I gave him the coffee." "He's welcome here." Ron turned slowly. "You wanna be cited for harboring undesirables, Emily? That what you want on your business license?" There was silence, the kind that cracked the room wide open. Marcus placed his cup down. "I'll go," he said softly. Not worth trouble for her. But Emily stepped beside his booth. He's not leaving. Ron stared at her, then at Marcus, then back. His face hardened. Jake looked away. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Not yet. Marcus stood slowly, not out of fear, but out of learned instinct, the kind that tells a man when a moment could go from cold to deadly with a single wrong word. He adjusted the strap of his duffel bag, nodded once at Emily in quiet gratitude, and turned to face Officer Ron Keller. "You want me outside, officer?" he said. "I'll comply. But I want to be clear, I've broken no law." Ron smirked as if he'd heard a joke only he found funny. "You're trespassing. That's a law." "I was invited in," Marcus replied, calm still in his voice. "Offered coffee, not loitering. You know the difference." Ron moved in closer, chest puffed like he was still on the football field back in high school. "You're on thin ice, hero." "Don't get mouthy, Ron," Jake interjected quietly. "Maybe we should just let this go." But Ron wasn't listening anymore. His eyes were locked on Marcus's, looking not for guilt but for defiance, anything he could use. "You smell that?" Ron asked, theatrically sniffing. "Smells like trouble." Emily stepped out from behind the counter, her hands clenched into fists by her sides. "Enough," she snapped. "This is harassment." "He's done nothing wrong." Ron didn't even look at her. He reached for Marcus's arm. "Let's go. You could tell your sad story down at the station." Marcus didn't resist, but he pulled his arm back gently. "Don't touch me unless you're placing me under arrest. I know my rights." That did it. Ron grabbed Marcus and spun him around, forcing his hands behind his back. The diner erupted in stunned gasps. A fork clattered to the floor. Someone said, "Hey, what the hell?" Jake moved fast, reaching out. "Ron, damn it. He's not resisting." Ron ignored him. "Vagrancy, disorderly conduct, interfering with an officer." "You're making that up," Marcus said, his voice still low, but sharper now. "You know you are." "I'll make up plenty more if you keep talking," Ron hissed, tightening the cuffs to Far. Marcus winced but said nothing more. As Ron dragged him toward the door, something fell from Marcus's coat pocket, a small, battered leather wallet. It hit the floor and flipped open, revealing a military ID. Faded but still legible. Jake saw it first. "Ron, he's a Marine." Ron paused, looked down, and scoffed. "Old paper. Could be fake." Emily rushed forward and picked up the wallet before Ron could. Her eyes scanned it quickly. "Marcus Bailey, Staff Sergeant, Honorable Discharge, Afghanistan Tour, 2 bronze stars." Ron snatched it from her hand and tossed it onto the counter. "Yeah, and I'm Santa Claus." Marcus, now outside in the morning frost, stood straight despite the cuffs. His breath formed clouds as he exhaled slowly. "You don't want to do this." "Oh, I do," Ron said. "And it's about time people like you learned." Marcus turned slightly. "I'd like to make a phone call," Ron laughed. "To who?" "Ghostbusters." Jake spoke again, quieter this time. "Legally." "We have to allow him." "Fine," Ron growled, unlocking the squad car and pushing Marcus into the back seat. He handed him a phone with a theatrical bow. "Make your call, soldier." Marcus took the phone without a word, dialed a number from memory. The tone rang twice, then a gravelly voice answered. "Keaton, sir," Marcus said simply. "It's Bailey." A pause. "Where are you?" "Middle of nowhere." "Cold diner." "Cuffed in a cruiser." Another pause. Then, "Give me 5 minutes." Marcus ended the call and handed the phone back through the bars. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just leaned back and looked out the window as if the conversation had been about the weather. Ron sneered. "That your lawyer?" Jake was looking at him now, really looking. "No, I think that was someone else." "Who?" "I don't know," Jake said. "But I've got a bad feeling about it." Inside the diner, Emily stood behind the counter like a storm gathering its own momentum. She picked up the fallen wallet and stared at the photo. Marcus younger, uniform crisp, eyes proud. Outside, Ron leaned against the car, arms crossed, enjoying the feeling of control. Jake stood nearby, uncertain, chewing on his thoughts like gristle. Exactly 4 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up in front of the diner. The doors opened in near silent unison. Out stepped a man in his 60s, tall, African-American, wearing a suit with military creases sharper than any dress code required. His presence shifted the air. Jake stood straighter immediately. Ron blinked, confused. The man walked up to the SWAT car, stared at Marcus through the window, then turned to the officers. Which of you is in charge? His voice was low, steady, undeniable. Ron stepped forward. That would be me. Officer Keller. The man didn't offer his hand. I'm General Joseph W. Keaton, retired, United States Marine Corps, former commander, 3rd Division. Ron's mouth opened, but no words came out. Jake muttered, "Holish, is Staff Sergeant Bailey in that car?" Keaton asked. Yes, Ron said quickly. He was causing a scene, loitering. No ID. He had ID. Jake cut in. Keaton turned his eyes on Jake, sharp but not hostile. You're the junior. Yes, sir. Officer Jake Carson. Keaton nodded. I appreciate your honesty. He turned back to Ron. Uncuff him. Now, Ron hesitated. With all due respect. There is no respect here, Keaton said flatly. You cuffed a decorated Marine for drinking coffee. You're going to undo that mistake immediately. Marcus was released moments later. He stepped out of the squad car and nodded to Keaton. Sir? Keaton nodded back. You good? I've had worse, Marcus said. Jake stepped forward. I didn't know, sir. I mean, I should have stopped it. You still can, Keaton replied. There's paperwork to file, internal affairs to call, statements to give. Ron's face had gone from red to pale. Are you threatening me? No, Keaton said. That part comes later. Ron tried to compose himself. Look, I was just following protocol. Man looked suspicious. Suspicious? Keaton echoed. You mean homeless? You mean black? You mean you had power and saw someone you could use it on? Inside the diner, the crowd had gathered by the window. Phones were out. The story had already begun to travel. Keaton turned to Marcus. You want to press charges? Marcus looked past him, toward the people watching, toward Emily, still frozen behind the counter. No, he said. But I want a record. I want the truth written down. I want it not to happen again. Keaton nodded. Then let's start with that. Jake looked down, then up at Marcus. I'm sorry. Truly, Marcus didn't answer right away. But then he said quietly, then don't be like him. 30 minutes later, the small-town police department, usually quiet around this hour, was rocked by the low, deliberate purr of a government-grade black SUV pulling into the front lot. The vehicle didn't screech, didn't flash lights or play sirens. It didn't need to. Inside the station, the front desk officer looked up from his coffee, confused, then alert as he caught sight of the seal on the vehicle's door. Department of Defense Retired Command. The SUV door opened with quiet precision. Out stepped General Joseph W. Keaton, dressed not in his old uniform, but in a dark overcoat and suit, sharply pressed, shoes polished to a mirror-like shine. His presence alone drew a thick, immediate silence from everyone in the lobby. Where's Marcus Bailey? He asked. The young desk officer blinked. He's in holding room 2. Keaton didn't wait for permission. Get your chief and tell Keller and Carson I want them in that room. Now. He walked with a soldier's stride, measured, controlled, powerful, without a hint of wasted energy. The hall parted for him like a river breaking around a stone. Officers whispered. Some saluted on instinct, though he hadn't worn the uniform in nearly 5 years. In holding room 2, Marcus sat on a bench, hands no longer cuffed, but posture still firm, spine straight despite the fatigue in his face. He heard the door open and didn't even look up until the voice came. Sergeant Bailey. Marcus stood immediately. The two men faced each other, and then, without a word, embraced. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't sentimental. It was battlefield respect, cold steel, wrapped in decades of trust. Gunny, Marcus said under his breath. Keaton smirked slightly. Ghost Walker. Even now, after all the years, their nicknames still clung like blood on desert sand. You still move like you're in Fallujah, Marcus added. You still look like you haven't slept since Kandahar. They both laughed briefly. Then the steel returned. Keaton turned toward the two officers who had just entered the room. Ron Keller, now pale and unsure, no longer in charge of anything, and Jake Carson, standing just a bit behind. eyes wide with the realization that he'd stepped into something far larger than he'd signed up for. Keaton didn't waste time. "Officer Keller," he said, his voice cutting the air like a blade. "You're the one who arrested Staff Sergeant Bailey?" Ron tried to stand straighter, recovering some of his bluster. "Yes, sir." He was loitering at a local diner and refused to leave when asked. "Do you have probable cause for detainment?" "Well, sir, he didn't have ID on him at first." "He did. You just didn't bother looking at it," Keaton snapped. "Where's the dashcam footage?" "Dashcam?" Ron hesitated. "It's the cruiser hasn't uploaded it yet." "Don't lie to me," Keaton barked. "You think I got to where I am by accepting excuses from men like you?" Jake stepped in, hesitant but honest. "Sir, I saw the ID for when Sergeant Bailey was being cuffed." "It was military issue. Real." "I should have spoken up more." Keaton turned his eyes to Jake. "You should have stopped the arrest altogether. But at least you still know right from wrong." He faced Ron again. "You were given a choice. You looked at a black man in a diner and saw a threat. And when he told you the truth, you escalated." Ron cleared his throat, voice tight. "I didn't know who he was. That's the point." "You didn't care." Keaton walked slowly over to the side table, placed his hands behind his back, and stared at the one-way mirror. "I want a copy of the dashcam, the bodycam, your incident report, the radio transcript, and the holding logs. I want them in my inbox before sundown. And I want a formal report sent to Internal Affairs. Now." Ron tried to protest. "General, with all due respect." "You don't speak," Keaton said, deadly quiet. "You listen, and then you pray your badge is still yours by sunrise." He turned back to Marcus, eyes softer now. "You good?" Marcus gave a small nod. "They didn't rough me up. Just dragged me through the dirt. Same dirt you bled for," Keaton said. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Exactly." A beat of silence passed. Marcus then glanced sideways at Ron. "I told you. I warned you." His voice was calm, but there was something behind it, an edge sharpened by years of humiliation, endured in silence. Not rage, not vengeance, just cold, measured justice. Ron looked like he wanted to speak, wanted to explain it all away with the usual phrases. Protocol, suspicion, safety. But the words wouldn't come. Not this time. Not when standing across from two war-hardened Marines who'd carried bodies across sand and seen real enemies, ones that didn't wear second-hand coats and drink free coffee. Keaton stepped toward the door. "Marcus, come with me." "We're leaving. Am I free to go?" Marcus asked, eyes still locked on Ron. "You were never supposed to be held." Jake opened the door. Marcus walked out without another word. As they disappeared down the hall, the tension in their room didn't lift. It grew heavier, as though everything around Ron Keller was caving in under the weight of a truth too long denied. The station remained silent long after they left. The SUV rolled smoothly out of the parking lot, its dark windows reflecting the dying morning light. Inside, the silence stretched, thick with unspoken memories. The interior smelled of old leather and faint tobacco, a smell Marcus remembered from command tents in foreign deserts. "You still don't smoke?" Keaton asked, breaking the silence as he tapped the side of a silver zipper against his palm. "Not since Kabul," Marcus said, voice low. Keaton nodded, then chuckled. "Right. You quit the day after that mortar hit our chow line. Didn't want my lungs doing overtime." They both laughed, but only briefly. The sound faded fast. The weight returned. Keaton glanced over. "You've been living on the streets?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He watched the buildings roll past. The world moved too fast outside. Inside, time crawled, off and on, Marcus said finally. "The waitlist is 7 months. Gotta got at the shelter some nights. Other nights, I just walk." "You shouldn't have to," Keaton muttered. Marcus looked at him, eyes sharp. "Lot of things I shouldn't have to do, Gunny. Like show a uniform to be treated like a man. Like explain my entire life story just to sit down and eat eggs." Keaton nodded slowly. "How many times has this happened?" Marcus shrugged. "How many times you want to count?" "Gas stations, bus stops, waiting outside job interviews. Always starts the same. Someone stares too long. Then comes the question you lost, sir. Then comes the suspicion." He paused. "And sometimes," Marcus said, voice tightening, Sometimes it ends with cuffs. Or worse. Keaton didn't speak. He just kept his eyes on the road, jaw clenched. But Marcus could see the tension in his neck, the way his fingers gripped the wheel. He wasn't angry at Marcus. He was angry for him. I should kept better track of you, Keaton finally said. You were dealing with your own demons. I didn't want to be another ghost in your file. You were never a ghost, Keaton said firmly. You're the best recon man I ever had. Hell, half the OPS in that sector don't go clean if you weren't running shadows. I was good in the field. Doesn't mean much when you're wearing rags in a city that looks through you. Keaton slowed at a red light, then turned toward Marcus, eyes blazing. I'm not letting this get buried. Not again. You know who I am, and you know what doors I can still open. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You trying to go public? I'm going beyond public, Keaton said. I am bringing this to the Pentagon. The press, too. Let them see what happens when men who bled for this country are treated like disposable criminals. I'm tired of ceremonies that forget the second the music stops. Marcus stared at him, quiet for a long time, then said, You're gonna put your name on the line for me. Keaton looked him dead in the eye. I am putting my rank on the line for justice. The SUV turned onto a quieter street. Keaton's estate loomed in the distance, gated, well kept, far from the alleys Marcus had slept in. I want you to stay here, Keaton said, until this is handled. I've got space. Security. You're not sleeping on concrete again. Marcus hesitated. The offer stoked more than he expected, not from pride, but from the years he'd convinced himself no one would ever make it all right. Marcus said finally, But this ends more than just my case. Keaton nodded. We start something. We finish it. Marcus looked out the window again. But this time, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. And for the first time in a long, long time, he felt ready. Night fell over the town like heavy velvet. But the day's tremor only grew before sunrise. Marcus's arrest was no longer a quiet humiliation tucked into a police lock. It was national news. It began with a single clip, 37 seconds of shaky phone footage from the diner. Ron Keller's voice rang out clearly. People like you start hanging around places they don't belong, followed by the click of steel on Marcus's wrists. A local college student posted it to X with the caption, Decorated Marine arrested for buying coffee while black. In 90 minutes the clip had 2 million views and a trending tag. #CuffIngaHero. Cable studios scrambled for guests. Veterans organizations issued statements before breakfast. By the time Marcus finished the first real meal he'd had in weeks, fried eggs and right toast at Keaton's kitchen table, every major network wanted him live on camera. He shook his head. I'm not a spectacle, he told Keaton. You're a spark. The general answered. The fire was already waiting. Double quotes. At the precinct. Captain Elaine Ortiz walked in wearing a grey suit instead of her uniform, a signal more ominous than sirens. Internal affairs badges followed her like storm clouds. Ron Keller was still writing his half-fiction incident report when Ortiz yanked it from his desk. Body cam. Dash cam. Radio traffic now, she said. Ron tried the swagger that had served him for years. It crumbled in his throat. We haven't had time to upload. Your cruiser auto-syncs every hour. If the footage isn't on the server, you disable the system, which is another felony. Choose. Jake Carson stood beside his locker, staring at his badge like it belonged to someone else. He turned it over, brushed a thumb across the county seal, then set it gently on the shelf. The clasp echoed when it hit metal. He fished out a blank notepad and began writing his resignation. The noon broadcast opened with split-screen drama. On the left, the dashcam video, Ron taunting, Marcus silent, Jake uneasy. On the right, a head and shoulders of Sergeant Bailey in uniform, plucked from Marine Archives. A Chiron scream, hero or handcuffs. Outrage in Beckley County. At Emily's diner, the phones rang so relentlessly she unplugged the landline. Reporters still crowded the sidewalk, jostling for shots of the scene of the crime. Emily taped a handwritten sign on the door. Kitchen closed, fundraiser in the works. She turned her dining room into a command post. Chairs stacked, tables pushed to the walls. Volunteers, church ladies, High school kids, off-duty nurses set up folding banquet tables. A veteran with a guitar tuned quietly in the corner. By dusk, a banner stretched across the window. Stand with Marcus Hot Meal. Hot music. Cold truth. The line wrapped around the block. Some came for brisket. Some for justice. Some to be seen doing something about it. Emily didn't care why they came. She cared that the jar by the register filled with crumpled 20s and 50s faster than she could empty it into money bags stamped for the local credit union. Marcus sat on Keaton's back porch, the yard lit by string bulbs and humming with cicadas. It smelled of cut grass and distant charcoal. He held Emily's first deposit slip 14, 372 in shaking fingers. Why does kindness feel heavier than spite? He asked softly. Keaton allowed himself into the chair beside him. Because you spent years carrying spite alone. Kindness, you carry with everyone who offers it. Weight adds up. Marcus folded the slip, tucked it in his pocket. Dear Keswick called, said my file came to their attention. Funny how that works. They're expediting your housing and medical, Keaton said matter-of-factly. Full benefits reinstated. Retroactive. You'll have back pay by the end of the month, Marcus exhaled. A sharp, incredulous laugh. All because a bully put cuffs on me. All because you survived everything that came after. Keaton corrected. Ron Keller spent the next 48 hours in a suffocating loop. Meetings with lawyers, recorded interviews with calls from a union rep who sounded less confident every time. When CNN played his mugshot-like booking photo beside the headline, "Officer Suspended in Vet Arrest," he punched the hotel drywall and watched his career bleed out in powdered gypsum. Below the headline scrawled a quote from Sheriff Abrams. This department will not tolerate racism or abuse of authority. Ron's phone buzzed with messages from old friends turned distant acquaintances. Sorry, man, rough spot. Hope it works out. None offered more than text. On Friday night, the town square lit up with candles. Jay Carson walked through the crowd without a uniform for the first time in years. He carried no sign, wore no ribbon, only a folded envelope addressed to Marcus Bailey. He found Emily, pressed it into her hands, whispered, "I need him to read this." It was a single page, handwritten. Sergeant Bailey, I did not stop him. I will carry that. I have resigned, effective today. If there is any way to make amends, I will spend my life finding it. Jake. When Marcus read the note later, he stared at the signature for a long time. Then he fished a pen from Keaton's desk and wrote 2 words beneath it. Begin here. Saturday morning. National talk shows featured panelists in polished studios debating policing or the Chiron-rotated statistics about homelessness among veterans. Keaton appeared via satellite from his study, ribbons and stars glinting behind him in a glass case. He spoke in an even baritone. Staff Sergeant Bailey is every soldier who came home and found a nation eager to thank him with slogans but unwilling to see him in need. What happened in that diner is not an aberration, it is an exposure. Across the country, veterans' halls open their doors for free breakfasts in Marcus's name. Hashtag spawn petitions. Petitions reached congressional inboxes. The House Committee on Veterans Affairs scheduled an emergency hearing titled Honor After Service, addressing discrimination against homeless veterans. Marcus watched the announcement on Keaton's living room television, an untouched mug of coffee cooling in his hands. I never wanted a movement, he murmured. Keaton, standing behind the couch, rested a hand on his shoulder. Movements don't ask permission. By the end of the week, Ron Keller's suspension became termination. The state attorney announced a civil rights investigation. The FBI requested precinct files. A local grand jury convened under sealed docket numbers. Emily's fundraiser crossed $48,000. She set up a non-profit Second Watch Foundation dedicated to transitional housing for homeless vets. Her accountant warned the paperwork might take months. A pro bono law firm got it processed in 11 days. On day 12, Marcus walked back into the diner wearing a lone navy blazer and clean slacks. Conversations hushed not in judgment this time, but in respect. Emily met him at the door, eyes bright with relief. Cups are clean. Coffee's hot. Then let's start there, Marcus said. He poured the first pot himself, filling mugs for volunteers, labeling donation boxes. No one reached for cameras. No one needed proof. The proof was standing between the smell of bacon and the clang of plates. Living and breathing and pouring coffee, he glanced at the counter stool where he'd sat that cold morning. The cushion had been reupholstered new vinyl, deep crimson. Emily noticed his gaze. "I figured it deserved better," she said. Marcus nodded, then smiled for the first time in longer than he could remember. "Yeah," he said softly. "We all do." Outside, a reporter filmed a stand-up and ended with the words everyone already felt. "Tonight Beckley County looks different, not because injustice appeared, but because someone finally turned the lights on. And once the lights are on, it's harder to look away." Across America, people kept watching, kept talking, kept asking what came next. Inside the diner, Marcus topped off a stranger's mug, steam curling into the air like a flag no one could tear down again. A month later, the Second Watch Foundation opened its first pilot housing facility in a renovated motel just 3 blocks from downtown. 15 rooms were cleared, cleaned, and furnished through a combination of local donations and Keaton's silent leverage in DXC. Veterans moved in, carrying duffel bags heavier with trauma than clothes. For the first time in years, they slept without checking the door lock twice. Marcus stood at the ribbon cutting, suited, with a fresh haircut. His posture still held a soldier's edge, but his eyes no longer full of distance held the present. "This building won't save the world," he said into the cluster of microphones, "but maybe it saves a night. And if you save enough nights, a man starts dreaming again." The crowd applauded, but not for the speech. They clapped for him, for surviving, for refusing to vanish. Meanwhile, the Beckley County Police Department underwent its first civil rights audit in state history. A scathing report followed. 37% of stops involving black men had no written justification. Body cams routinely failed to upload. Disciplinary action had been inconsistently applied, with a bias toward internal protection. Captain Elaine Otis ordered mandatory de-escalation training and brought in outside consultants. When reporters asked if the department was being forced to change, she replied simply, "We're being given a chance to change. That's rarer and more valuable than most realize." Jake Carson quietly joined the board of Second Watch. He spent 2 nights a week volunteering in the kitchen, often silent, always present. No one mentioned his past, but everyone noted his humility. Emily offered him a job once. Behind the counter. "I am not ready," he said. "You don't have to be," she replied. "Just come in when you are." He did 2 weeks later. Keaton returned to Washington after 2 months, having testified before both Senate and House committees. His closing statement, televised and replayed countless times, became a national echo. No man who wore the flag should ever be reduced to begging under it. His words reached presidential ears. Legislation followed, a bipartisan bill titled the Bailey Reform Act, focused on fast-tracking mental health and housing for homeless veterans, including stricter federal oversight for local enforcement agencies. It passed the House with 387 votes. The Senate approved it by a margin of 91-9. Marcus didn't attend the ceremony. He watched it on TV, sitting beside Keaton, with Emily pouring coffee beside them like nothing had changed. Maybe it hadn't, but for Marcus, it felt like something had begun. On the 6-month anniversary of the diner incident, a documentary crew asked to follow Marcus for a day. He declined. "I'm not a headline," he told them. "I'm a man. Headlines fade. I'm still here." Instead, he wrote an op-ed published in The Atlantic. "I am not lucky to be seen. I am not grateful for survival. I am expected to die quietly, blamed for scars I didn't inflict. But I won't. I won't be silent, and I won't accept peace that costs me my dignity." The piece was quoted by 3 senators and turned into classroom material at Columbia Journalism School. A professor called it one of the most distilled expressions of post-service alienation in modern America. Marcus didn't care about the praise. He cared that when he visited shelters to speak, young men with nowhere else to go called him sir again, not out of fear, but out of respect. And then, one spring afternoon, Something simple happened. Marcos walked into Emily's diner and no one looked up. No stares, no whispers, no questions. He took a seat, ordered black coffee and a short stack. Jake, in his apron, delivered it with a smile and a nod. Across the room, a couple of off-duty officers sat sipping tea. They didn't flinch. One even raised a cup in acknowledgement. Emily slid into the booth opposite him and watched him eat. Well, she asked. Marcus chewed, swallowed, thought. It tastes like breakfast, he said. Emily smiled. Finally, they didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. Somewhere between silence and syrup, Marcus found peace, not the kind carved into marble monuments, but the kind you build day by day, cup by cup, until the world finally forgets to be cruel long enough to feel like home. And this time, no one would take that peace from him again. 6 months later, Washington, D.C. was burning not with fire, but with cameras, press badges, and anticipation. Inside the National Veterans Policy Forum, chandeliers glittered like armor overhead. Suits filled the rows, badges gleamed. The smell of fresh printed briefings mixed with the slight metallic tang of nervous ambition. Marcus stood backstage, his hands clasped behind him. He hadn't worn the uniform in years, but today it hung from his shoulders again, pressed, proud, and complete with medals he once buried in a box under his coat. Keaton touched his elbow gently. "You ready?" Marcus turned to him. "Doesn't matter." Keaton gave a half smile. "That's the most veteran answer I've heard all week." They walked out together. The applause wasn't deafening, it was reverent. Marcus stepped to the podium, adjusted the mic, and let the room fall silent. He scanned the crowd, senators, generals, activists, former rivals. Then he looked beyond them toward the front row, where Emily sat, calm and steady. Next to her, Jake nodded once. A few seats over, a young black woman in an Air Force dress uniform wiped her eyes before Marcus even spoke. He cleared his throat. "When I first came back from war," he began, "I didn't want parades. I wanted to disappear. And the world helped me." The room listened. "I became invisible because I was easier to ignore than to help. Until one day, 2 men in uniform saw me not as a brother, but as a threat. And because of that moment, the country started to see me again." He paused, measured the next words. "We are not symbols. We are not burdens. We are veterans. That title doesn't end when the war does." He reached into his pocket and held up a dock tag. "This is my brother's. He didn't make it home, but I carry this to remind me. If I waste my breath, I waste his life." He looked out again. "So I speak, and I fight, not because I want to, but because someone must." He let the tag fall back into his pocket. "I'm not here today because I want to be remembered. I'm here so no one else has to be forgotten." The applause this time was not polite. It rose like a storm, not because the words were perfect, but because the silence they filled had gone on too long. After the speech, Marcus walked the hallway alone. Cameras waited outside. A staffer rushed to him. "Sir, there's someone requesting a moment with you. Says it's personal." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Name?" She wouldn't say. He followed her to a quiet anteroom. Inside, a woman stood near the window. Her back was straight, hands clasped. When she turned, her face struck him like a memory he'd forgotten to grieve. "Chloe?" He breathed. She nodded. "Took me a while to track you down." He hadn't seen her in 15 years, not since her brother, Tyrone, Marcus's best friend in Iraq, died in an ambush Marcus had survived. "I read about you," she said. "Watched the diner video, the hearings, the bill, and I kept thinking he'd be proud." Marcus's throat tightened. "He died trying to make the world better," she added. "You're doing it." They sat. No tears, just quiet and truth. "I've got a foundation now," she said. "Helps kids in Baltimore stay out of the pipeline. Could use a speaker." Marcus smiled. "You sure you want a guy who used to sleep under a bridge?" She met his eyes. "Exactly why I do." That night, Marcus walked the empty streets of DXC. The monument shone under moonlight. The city that once ignored him now held his story in its heart. His phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Jake wants to rename the diner." Something about second watch CAF. Said he'd ask your permission. I told him you'd say yes. Marcus grinned. Then his smile faded into something deeper, a sense of gravity and grace. He typed back. Make sure the coffee's still free for those who need it most. Somewhere, far from the cameras and speeches, a new recruit pinned on her badge for the first time. She'd read Marcus's story in her academy ethics class. She'd memorized it, not as myth but as mandate, and in a quiet office, an older officer cleaned out his desk, not because he was forced, but because he'd seen what shame looked like and decided to build something better in its place. Marcus didn't know them. He didn't need to, because now, when a black man walked into a diner, people paused not out of fear, but to ask if he was okay. Not everywhere, not always, but somewhere. And that was enough to keep going. The end. Or perhaps just the beginning. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Share it. Speak up. And remember, dignity has no uniform, and respect has no color. Until next time.